The sun hadn't yet climbed fully above the hills when the soft hush of morning drifted over the land. A thin veil of mist clung to the ground like a silk shawl drawn across the shoulders of the earth. The cool air was thick with the scent of damp soil, fresh hay, and wildflowers just beginning to open their petals. Everything felt slow, tender, and utterly still. The kind of morning that spoke in whispers, not words. Light from the early sun crept gently through the farmhouse windows, filtering through thin linen curtains to paint soft gold across the wooden floor. It reached the faces of Thomas and Eleanor where they lay still in bed, warm beneath woolen blankets. The sun kissed their cheeks like an old friend saying good morning, and as it touched them, the couple slowly stirred. Thomas blinked awake first, his weathered hands rubbing sleep from his eyes. He turned toward Eleanor, who lay peacefully beside him, her gray-streaked hair spread softly across the pillow, her breathing slow and even. Her face, lined delicately with years of laughter and labor, still held the quiet beauty he had first seen when she was a girl of 19. The daughter of a modest apothecary who once lived just inside Verona's southern gate. Eleanor had chosen this life. As the daughter of a city tradesman, she might have stayed within the walls, surrounded by brick and bustle, but instead, she had longed for a life closer to the soil. When Thomas returned from his years of service, his body tired, but his heart still strong, she married him, and together they settled on the king's gift of land. Over the decades, they had turned this place into something more than a farm. It was a home carved from devotion and quiet joys. With a quiet groan, Thomas swung his legs from the bed. The smooth wood was cool beneath his feet. He took his time pulling on his woolen tunic, faded and softened from years of honest use, and buttoned it carefully, more out of habit than necessity. He laced his boots, then moved to the wash basin near the window, where he splashed his face with cold water from the pitcher Eleanor had filled the night before. The chill woke him fully, and he breathed deep, taking in the scent of lavender soap and morning air. He stepped out into the golden light of dawn. The earth greeted him with all its gentle sounds: birdsong from the tall oaks, the rustling of leaves in a sleepy breeze, and the faint hum of bees already stirring in the orchard. His boots crunched softly on the gravel path as he made his way toward the barn. Past rows of vegetables just catching the light, leafy green cabbages, proud stalks of maize, and beans that curled lazily around their trellises. The old mare, Brina, saw him first. She lifted her head over the stable door and let out a soft nicker, hooves shifting eagerly. Brina had been with him since his first year on the farm, a loyal companion through every season. Thomas smiled and stroked her muzzle, whispering a gentle greeting. "Good morning, old girl." He brushed her coat with slow, practiced strokes, loosening the straw and dust from her flanks. Then he filled her trough with fresh oats, the grain rustling gently as he poured. She began to eat, her breath huffing softly in rhythm, and Thomas leaned against the stable door for a moment, just watching her. From the hen house nearby, the morning chorus had begun. As Thomas approached, the hens bustled with eager excitement, their red combs bobbing as they followed him closely. He scattered the feed by hand, watching the grains fan out across the ground like a magician's trick. The hens darted forward in a flurry of feathers and soft clucks, pecking rhythmically as if dancing to an invisible melody. One by one, he checked each bird, lifting a hen gently to inspect her feet, ensuring another's wing wasn't drooping, cooing softly to the smallest one who still had trouble finding her place in the flock. Further down the path, the goats bleated lazily, and Thomas moved on to them, rubbing their heads, checking their hooves, and refilling their troughs with chopped carrots and water fresh from the well. As he made his way through the barn, he took quiet note of each animal. The 2 fat pigs still snoring under a pile of straw, the pair of doves cooing in their perch above the rafters, and the cow, Maisie, who gave milk each morning like clockwork, her great eyes blinking slowly as she watched him work. All the while, from the open windows of the farmhouse, the smell of breakfast began to drift outward. Eleanor was awake now and moving about the warm hearth, her apron tied neatly over her shift, humming softly to herself. The scent of toasted rye bread mingled with the warm, earthy aroma of porridge simmering gently over the fire. She stirred in a handful of crushed oats and a pinch of cinnamon, her signature touch, and set a small pot of cider on the hearth to warm, dropping in cloves and a single star of anise.
The smell wrapped around the house like a blanket, drifting across the fields where Thomas stood. It was the smell of love, of home, of decades spent tending not just land, but each other. He looked toward the farmhouse and saw Eleanor at the window, waving gently, her face brightened by the morning light. In her hands was a small tray with 2 bowls, a loaf of bread wrapped in linen, and a little pot of honey, golden as the sunrise. He smiled and waved back, heart full, the quiet world around him glowing with the warmth of the life they had built, not with grandeur, but with care. And in that early hour, with the animals fed, the fields just beginning to stir, and the soft smells of breakfast hanging sweet in the air, Thomas felt the calm settle over him like a second skin. This, he thought, is peace.
By early afternoon, the sun had risen high in the sky, casting long, golden rays that danced across the fields. The gentle warmth on Thomas's shoulders was like a reassuring hand, a reminder of the day's steady rhythm and the turning of seasons. The morning's work had passed with quiet satisfaction, and now the hour had come to make their way into the city of Verona. Inside the barn, the smell of fresh hay mingled with the earthy scent of turned soil and sun-warmed wood. The large wooden cart, with its broad wheels and curved frame, waited patiently under the overhang, just as it had for years. Its corners were worn smooth from countless journeys into town, and its sides bore the rich polish of age and use. Eleanor met Thomas there, wiping her hands on her apron, her face flushed slightly from the heat of the kitchen. Together, without speaking much, for words were not needed between them, they began to load the day's harvest. From the cool root cellar, they brought up baskets of turnips with skin like smooth stone, their leafy tops still damp with morning dew. Onions, sweet and sharp, were tucked into burlap sacks. From the far corner of the barn, Eleanor fetched the wooden crates of late-season strawberries, ruby red and sun-kissed, their fragrance spilling sweetly into the air. Glass jars of preserved pears, pale and tender in their syrup, clinked gently as they were placed side by side, wrapped in cloth to keep them steady on the road. Finally, bundles of freshly cut lavender, tied with twine and still humming with bees moments before, were laid carefully across the top, their calming scent rising like a sigh into the sunlight. Thomas checked the leather harnesses of the two horses, Brina and Kellen, a younger stallion with a quiet temperament and deep brown eyes. The horses stood steady, well fed, and brushed clean, their manes braided simply to keep them tidy for the city. He ran his hand along their sides, whispering thanks as he tightened the reins and ensured the cart's wheels were greased and secure. Eleanor brought out a small basket wrapped in linen, a few slices of cheese, a round of dark bread, and a flask of cool, well water. Their midday meal for the road.
They climbed up onto the cart's wooden bench, side by side, and with a soft word and a flick of the reins, the horses began their gentle trot forward. The wheels creaked and turned, the cart swaying ever so slightly as it rolled along the well-worn dirt path that wound away from their estate and toward the hills beyond. The countryside opened up before them like a storybook page. Rolling meadows stretched out on either side, dotted with wildflowers and bordered by tall hedgerows alive with chirping crickets. The wheat fields swayed gently in the breeze, golden and full, whispering to one another as the cart passed. The path narrowed at places and widened at others, cutting through groves of olive trees whose silvery leaves shimmered in the sunlight. Occasionally, a hawk circled above, its shadow skimming the ground as if in quiet salute. As they traveled, they passed a small hamlet nestled near the bend of a slow-moving creek. A few children waved from beside a stone well, their hands sticky with berries, their laughter like wind chimes in the breeze. A woman hanging laundry gave a cheerful nod, and an old man sitting beneath a fig tree tipped his hat. Everyone knew Thomas and Eleanor, not just for their produce, but for their presence. Steady, kind, familiar. Further along they crossed a narrow bridge of stone, the river below catching the sunlight like shards of glass. The horses' hooves clattered softly over it, echoing for a moment before silence returned. Beyond the bridge, the hills began to rise slightly, and the road wove through groves of chestnut and walnut trees. The air grew cooler in these shaded parts, carrying the faint smell of moss and wood smoke from a distant hearth. Eleanor leaned into Thomas slightly, resting her hand over his. "We should stop at the herbalist's today," she said gently. "I'd like to buy some dried rose hips for winter tea." Thomas nodded with a faint smile. "And we could visit Matteo, see if he has that seed you wanted."
The city was not far now. On the horizon, the towers and terracotta roofs of Verona came into view, rising like a painting from the land. Its stone walls, time-worn and proud, stood tall against the sky, welcoming travelers with the quiet dignity of centuries. The bell tower of the old cathedral struck two soft notes as they approached, the sound floating on the breeze and mingling with the murmurs of the busy streets ahead. From the quiet hills of home to the bustle of Verona, the world moved gently. No urgency, no hurry. Just the rhythm of wheels on the road, the soft clop of hooves, and two hearts content in each other's company. As the countryside passed them by, golden and still beneath the afternoon sun.
Cobbled streets of Verona greeted Thomas and Eleanor like an old song, familiar, worn with time, but always comforting. As the wagon eased through the city's arched gates, the horses' hooves clacked gently against the stones, and the warm afternoon air carried with it the scent of rosemary, fresh bread, and distant wood smoke from bakeries still busy at their hearths. The city moved gently around them, full of the sounds of daily life, the soft chatter of townsfolk bartering in low tones, the rhythmic splash of the fountain in the square, and the occasional distant chime of church bells.
Merchants called out in practiced, welcoming voices from their stalls, offering everything from bolts of dyed linen to baskets of figs and sun-dried tomatoes. Thomas guided the cart slowly through the marketplace, nodding respectfully to a few familiar vendors as he passed. Eleanor smiled warmly at the flower seller near the apothecary, who waved with a flourish of yellow blossoms in her hands. These faces were known to them, neighbors in spirit, if not in soil. Near the large central fountain, carved in pale stone and surrounded by ivy and the faded ghosts of pigeons' footsteps, Thomas parked the cart in his usual spot, beneath the shade of a spreading chestnut tree. The water trickled steadily from the marble mouths of lions, the sound like a lullaby amid the city's heartbeat.
One by one, familiar townsfolk approached. The baker's wife, who adored Eleanor's lavender bundles. A young boy, who always asked for just one strawberry before his mother laughed and handed over her coins. And an elderly scribe, who favored Thomas's turnips and always paid with exact change and a whispered, "Bless you." Each exchange was simple, kind, and unhurried. Coins slipped into hands, soft thanks given, smiles shared without the weight of expectation. As the baskets emptied, Thomas and Eleanor took their time walking through the winding lanes of the market, hand in hand. There were items they needed, but more than that, there was joy in the browsing, the simple pleasure of choosing a fine bar of soap carved with an herb pattern, or selecting a bolt of forest green wool from a merchant with fingers stained by dye and time. They stopped next to the spice cart, where Eleanor held up a bundle of dried rose hips. "For your winter teas," Thomas said with a grin. She smiled and tucked them into her basket with care. Not far from the fountain, nestled in a stone shop front with an ivy-wrapped sign that read Matteo's Seeds and Sundries, stood an old friend.
Matteo emerged from the doorway before they could even call his name, wiping his hands on a linen cloth. He had aged gracefully. Thick, gray curls, sun-worn skin, and a deep laugh that still rumbled like it had in the old barracks. His arms opened wide. "Thomas!" he called, voice echoing just enough to startle a nearby chicken someone had brought to market. "And Eleanor! Still as lovely as the first time you broke this old fool's heart." Eleanor rolled her eyes with a soft chuckle as she stepped forward to kiss him on both cheeks. Thomas and Matteo embraced in the way old soldiers do, firm, wordless, full of memories. Though decades had passed since their service together, under the king's banner, their bond remained like steel beneath rust, weathered but unbreakable. "I've got those marigold seeds you asked about," Matteo said, ushering them inside, "and a few odds and ends from the hills. A hunter brought me wild fennel root this morning. I set some aside just for you."
They traded easily, bartering like old times. A jar of Eleanor's pear preserves and a small sack of lavender for a bundle of seeds, 2 dried roots and a pinch of saffron, tucked into wax paper like a secret treasure. Matteo poured them each a tiny cup of cider as they talked, not the sharp kind for trading, but the good one from his private cask. They spoke of quiet things, the fields, the weather, and the comfort of peace. No mention of battles or banners, only the now, which was soft and golden. As the afternoon deepened, they returned to the square to finish their trading. Thomas haggled gently with the grain seller, a good-natured young man with a new child in tow, and bartered down the cost of a large sack of barley. Eleanor picked up beeswax candles, their soft honey scent reminding her of autumn evenings by the hearth. They exchanged preserved pears with a woman selling handmade combs, trading sweetness for craft. By the time they began to load the last of their purchases back into the cart, the sun was already leaning westward. Shadows stretched longer across the plaza, softening the sharpness of the city's edges. The air cooled just slightly, and the golden light filtered between tiled rooftops like melted amber. They climbed back into the cart, the horses nudging forward with little coaxing, as if they too felt the pull of home. The city gave way behind them, stone by stone, sound by sound, until the cobbles turned to earth again and the countryside welcomed them back with open arms. As they rode into the gentle hills, the sky painted itself in bronze and rose. A few birds glided overhead in slow arcs. The wagon rocked gently beneath them, full of empty baskets, new goods, and the quiet joy of a day well spent. And as the last sliver of sunlight kissed the edges of the road, Thomas placed his hand over Eleanor's and whispered, "Let's stop by the orchard when we get back, just to see how the plums are coming along." She smiled, her eyes half-lidded with the calm of the hour. "I'd like that." And the horses carried them forward, steady and slow, beneath a sky deepening into twilight. The journey home from Verona was slow and comfortable. The kind of ride where words weren't needed, and silence felt like a shared understanding. The cart rolled steadily across the familiar countryside, its wooden wheels murmuring along the dirt path as golden light draped itself over the hills. The horses moved at an easy pace, the scent of lavender still rising from the empty baskets and bundles tied behind them. As they passed through the last orchard and the rooftops of their estate came into view, Eleanor leaned her head softly against Thomas's shoulder. He smiled without looking, gently shifting the reins. Home was close, and the day's labors, both in the fields and the city, had left a warm weight in their limbs, the kind that comes not from strain, but from the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Back at the estate, Thomas guided the horses to the barn, his hand steady even as the shadows of evening stretched long across the yard. He unbuckled the harness with practiced ease and gave Brina and Kellen each a gentle pat, murmuring his thanks as they settled in with fresh feed and cool water. Eleanor, already off the wagon, began untying their parcels. There was no rush, no instruction given, no need for talk. Their movements were in harmony, not choreographed, just familiar. They unloaded the cart together, placing the wool, the grain, the spices, and the herbs gently inside the farmhouse. Each item set with care upon the wooden table Eleanor kept spotless. A few strawberries remained, and Eleanor set them aside for the next morning's porridge. With the last basket tucked away, Thomas turned to her, his eyes warm. A soft look passed between them. No obligation, no expectation, just a shared knowing. Years ago, on a cool spring evening, much like this one, Thomas had carved a bath out of oak, wide enough for two, as a gift to Eleanor on their 30th anniversary. It stood just beside the farmhouse now, nestled between a small grove of plum trees and the herb garden. He'd sanded the wood smooth and lined the bottom with polished river stones, so the water would stay warm longer and soothe tired feet. Tonight, Eleanor had already begun filling it. Steam drifted into the evening air, carrying with it the soft, grounding scent of rosemary and lavender. The sky above was fading from gold to a soft, dusky violet, and the first stars blinked faintly against the horizon. Without a word, they undressed and slipped into the warm water together.
The oak embraced them gently, the bath cradling their tired bodies as the heat soaked into their bones. Steam curled upward and disappeared into the quiet sky. Thomas leaned back, his arms resting along the smooth rim, eyes half closed. Eleanor settled beside him, her shoulder brushing his as her hair fanned out across the water. A breeze moved through the plum trees, rustling the leaves with a sound like silk. In the distance, the farm still murmured with life. The low grunt of the pigs turning over in their straw, the soft cluck of hens settling in, the faint creak of the barn door swinging gently on its hinge. It was all so familiar, so soothing, like the notes of a lullaby, known since childhood. For a long while, they said nothing. They didn't need to. The silence was a kind of love, not grand, not spoken, but steady and deep as the land they tended. Eventually, Eleanor rose from the bath with a kiss to Thomas's temple, wrapping herself in a wool robe as the steam still clung to her skin. She stepped barefoot across the flagstone and into the house, the door swinging shut with a soft click behind her. Inside, she moved easily through the kitchen, unwrapping the vegetables they'd brought home: onions, turnips, and a few sprigs of rosemary. Into the black iron pot, she added barley, water, and a generous spoonful of salt. The stew simmered low over the hearth, filling the cottage with a scent that was rich and earthy, softened by the sweetness of the root vegetables and the hint of fennel mateo had slipped into her hand earlier that day. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering amber light across the stone walls and worn floorboards. The scent of burning oak mingled with the aroma of supper, wrapping the room in a warmth that went beyond temperature, a warmth that filled the chest and slowed the breath. Thomas entered quietly, wrapped in his robe, his cheeks pink from the bath, his silver-streaked hair still damp. He moved to the hearth without speaking, settling into the chair beside it as Eleanor ladled the stew into 2 earthen bowls. Alongside it, she placed slices of yesterday's bread, warmed on a stone beside the fire and spread lightly with soft cheese. They sat close, their knees touching under the small oak table. The fire snapped gently, casting dancing shadows that moved across the wooden beams above. Outside, a few fireflies had begun to glow along the edges of the windows, their tiny lights blinking in rhythm with the cricket's song. They ate slowly, savoring each bite. The stew was hearty and simple, thick with barley, chunks of tender turnip, sweet onion, and the slight floral note of rosemary. Eleanor paused now and then to take a sip of the spiced cider she had warmed, the scent of cloves rising with each breath. Thomas reached across the table once, his calloused hand resting on hers for a moment, thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. She looked at him and smiled, her eyes lit with a soft kind of happiness that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. The only sounds were the quiet crackle of the fire, the occasional creak of the wooden table, and the soft clink of spoon against bowl. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grass and trees, wrapping the farmhouse in its long, slow breath. Later, they would clean the bowls and bank the fire. Later, they would slip into bed beneath linen sheets, the scent of lavender and wood smoke still lingering in their hair and skin. But for now, they sat together by the hearth, full and content, held by the peace of evening, not speaking, not needing to, as the day folded gently into night. As the last spoonful of stew was eaten, and the fire in the hearth dipped into soft embers, the gentle hush of night settled around the farmhouse. The day had been full, not of noise or urgency, but of simple movements and shared glances, of sun-warmed roads and quiet exchanges. Now, twilight had deepened into evening, and the world had slowed to a whisper. Thomas stood from his chair, the glow of the dying fire catching on the silver in his beard. He stretched slowly, his joints sighing in time with his breath, and walked over to the old oak peg by the door. From it, he lifted the torch, its handle smoothed by years of use, and lit it carefully from the hearth. The flame flared to life, casting a soft, golden glow that flickered against the farmhouse walls. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, the torch held in one hand, and in the other the bundle of canvas and linen, the old tenting material, folded neatly just that morning. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His movements were deliberate and calm, his heart slow and steady in his chest. With each step across the stone threshold, a deep quiet wrapped around him. Not silence, but a gentle stillness, as though the land itself were holding its breath. The stars had begun to bloom above him, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the inky sky. The torch crackled softly, and the firelight illuminated the soft sway of wheat in the distance, the tops of the fields shimmering silver in the moonlight. As Thomas walked toward the gentle rise behind the barn, the scent of dew and warm earth rose with each step, grounding him in the life they'd made. Back inside, Eleanor watched from the doorway, her hands still resting lightly on the edge of the table. She didn't call after him. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she smiled to herself, a small, knowing curve of the lips, and turned toward the cupboard. From within, she pulled a dark bottle of red wine and 2 clay cups, slightly mismatched, but well loved. She cradled the bottle against her hip as she reached for a soft woolen shawl draped across the back of a chair. Without hurry, she began preparing the small tray they always used for evenings like this. A candle in a jar, the 2 cups, and the wine. She didn't need to ask where they were going. She knew. It was the perfect night. Outside, Thomas reached the hill and paused. He planted the torch in the ground where it cast a flickering glow over the open space. Slowly and deliberately, he began setting up the tent, stretching the linen canopy over the oak poles, tying the corners down with the worn rope he kept neatly coiled in the barn. The ground beneath him was soft, padded with old grass, and the scent of crushed thyme rose with each footstep. When he finished, he stepped back and looked upward. The sky had opened fully now, a great dome of stars, endless and ancient. The moon, round and benevolent, bathed the fields in gentle light. It reminded him of nights long ago, in distant places, when he and the men in his company would lie beneath the sky and speak of home. Back then, Eleanor had been miles away, but they'd both looked at the same stars. He'd always wondered if she was thinking of him, if her eyes were fixed on the same moon. He knew now that she had been, and tonight she would be by his side. He turned to see her approaching, tray in hand, her shawl brushing against her ankles as she moved through the grass. The candle glowed softly between them, the flame dancing gently in the breeze. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. There was no need. Together, they lay down atop the thick blankets and furs Thomas had already set. The earth beneath them was solid and warm from the day's sun. They clinked their cups once, softly, and sipped in silence. The wine was dry and rich, with a hint of fruit still clinging to it. A simple bottle from a vineyard near the river, traded weeks ago for a jar of honey and a small bag of walnuts. Thomas wrapped one arm around Eleanor as she nestled against his side, her head tucked beneath his chin, her fingers laced with his. They lay that way for a long time, just breathing, just being. There was no concept of a work week, no separation of weekend or labor. There was only this, the rhythm of days, of tending and resting, of love built across time and seasons. All around them, the estate responded to their presence. The animals, sensing the nearness of their caretakers, stirred only briefly. The old mare nickered softly, then settled again in the hay. The hens rustled once beneath their coop, then were still. Even the goats, curled together near the barn, seemed to sigh into their sleep. Peace moved through the land like a slow wind, gentle and unseen. Above them, the stars shimmered. Around them, the night hummed with life. And between them, there was only warmth, trust, and the quiet joy of a shared journey. And sleep, like the hush between two notes of a lullaby, began to settle over them, soft and sure, as the earth turned beneath the sky.